What's the most insane thing a teacher did to make a point? I was in chemistry class when the fire alarm went off. I got ready to wheel myself out, but that's when our substitute stepped in front of the exit and turned the deadbolt. Nobody's going anywhere. What are you doing? I gasped. Miss Grant pointed at me in my wheelchair. I'm tired of this generation's manufactured helplessness. You're going to prove she can walk, or we all stay. The smoke smell was getting stronger. You could see other classes evacuating through the window. I have muscular dystrophy. I physically cannot. Don't even try. I've seen the TikToks. Everyone wants to be fat and lazy now. Anxiety, autism, wheelchair-bound. It's all the rave. This is insane, Dylan shouted. There's a real fire. Perfect motivation then. That's when the teacher's pet, Caitlin, decided to speak up. Actually, she's been like this for attention since middle school. Miss Art Grant's eyes lit up. See? Even she knows. The smoke was visible now, creeping under the door. Kids were pulling shirts over their faces. Let us out! Zoe banged on the door. Only when she admits she's faking. Everyone tried to go on their phones, but it was rural Oklahoma. No signal. I thought back to a few weeks ago when Miss Grant made me wait after class. You know, she'd said, my nephew pretended he needed a wheelchair for 3 months. Got it from social media. His parents finally took it away, and guess what? Miracle cure. The pieces clicked. She'd been planning this. Please, I begged. Just let everyone else go. This is between us. No. They need to witness what happens when you stop enabling weakness. The smoke was thicker now. Like a black wall. Tara was coughing so hard she couldn't stand straight. That's when I noticed Mikey in the back row. His inhaler was out, but it wasn't helping. Miss Grant! I screamed. Mikey's coughing blood. He needs help. She didn't even turn around. You all rehearse together, don't you? Mikey collapsed against his desk, wheezing. The blood was darker now, more of it with each cough. This is real! Look at him! Miss Grant looked at her nails. I wasn't born yesterday. The smoke was so thick now you could taste it. Metallic and bitter. That's when Amara hit the floor. Hard. I did the only thing I could think of. I unlocked my chair brakes and let myself fall forward onto the floor. See? I dragged myself with my arms, my legs dead weight behind me. This is all I can do. Movement! She clapped. You're already improving. With a little more motivation. Her legs aren't working! Terry screamed. Are you blind? The lights flickered and went out. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red. Mikey was making these horrible gurgling sounds now. Kids were trying to prop him up, but the blood kept coming. We need to break the door. Ross grabbed a chair. Touch that door and I'll have you arrested for assault. Miss Grant blocked him. More kids were dropping. Even Caitlin was sobbing now. I'm sorry. I lied. She is disabled. Please let us out. Miss Grant's face went white. You're just saying that because, boom. Something exploded down the hall. The building shook. That's when PJ grabbed my wheelchair and threw it against the window. The safety glass cracked but didn't break. Stop helping her. Miss Grant shoved him. You're part of the problem. Through the door window, we could see the hallway filling with thick smoke. The crackling sound was getting louder. If she dies, it's murder, Bernadette sobbed. The only thing dying is her victim complex. I dragged myself across the floor to Miss Grant's feet, grabbed her ankle. Please, I have medical records, doctors, MRIs, showing my spine. She kicked me away. All fake. Doctors enable this too. Kids were on the floor. Someone was throwing up from the fumes. Mikey wasn't coughing anymore. He was just still, too still. He's not breathing, someone screamed. Crack. Glass shattered somewhere in the building. Kids were screaming. Miss Grant's arrogance finally cracked. Maybe it was the orange glow now visible under the door. The door burst open and smoke poured in like water. Kids stumbled out, carrying each other, coughing, crying. PJ and Terry lifted me back into my chair. 2 other boys grabbed Mikey, his body lifeless and heavy. We rushed toward the stairs where everyone was packed like sardines. The elevator's out, someone yelled. Fire protocol. The accessibility ramp was in the west wing, the wing that was on fire. 4 guys ended up carrying me and my chair down 2 flights of stairs while the building burned. We made it out. Or most of us did anyway. Fast forward 2 weeks later. We were sitting in class when our teacher broke the news. After receiving his diagnosis of permanent lung damage and chronic respiratory failure, Mikey had passed away while on life support, all thanks to Mrs. Grant. That's when I knew getting fired wasn't enough. We had to destroy her. Went viral, but that wasn't enough to make real change happen. So Pooja said we needed to file official paperwork with the district about our lawsuit plans. She typed up this long document full of legal terms about ADA violations and negligence and had me sign it at her office downtown. The receptionist made copies while Pooja explained how this notice would force the district to preserve all their records and take us seriously. I watched her attach it to an email and hit send. Then she printed out the delivery confirmation and put it in a folder with my name on it. 3 days later, my mom brought in the mail, and there was this thick envelope from the school district with their lawyer's name in the corner. My hands shook opening it because I knew this was them fighting back. The letter was 2 pages of basically saying they were sorry about what happened, but they weren't responsible for anything Ms. Grant did. They invited me to some listening session next week where concerned students could share their feelings in a safe space. Pooja read it over the phone and laughed. Said this was just them trying to control what people said and make it look like they cared. She told me to ignore it and focus on the school board meeting coming up instead. We spent the next afternoon at her office going over what I could say during public comment. She had me practice reading my statement over and over, timing it with her phone to make sure I stayed under 2 minutes. Every time I tried to add details about how scared I was or how angry it made me, She'd cross it out and remind me to stick to facts only. The final version was just dates and times and what Ms. Grant said and did. Nothing about feelings at all. The night of the board meeting, I could barely eat dinner because my stomach was doing flips. My mom drove me to the high school auditorium, and the parking lot was packed with way more cars than usual. Inside, the room was full of parents and students and even some reporters with cameras in the back. I signed up for public comment at the table by the door, my name going on slot number 14. We sat through an hour of budget reports and personnel decisions before they finally called for public speakers. My hands were sweating. So bad I could barely grip my wheels when my turn came. I rolled up to the microphone they'd set up in the middle aisle and unfolded my paper. My voice shook from the first word and didn't stop shaking the whole time I read about the locked door and the smoke and Mikey dying 2 weeks later. Someone in the back row was recording with their phone held up high. The board members just stared at me with blank faces, not reacting to anything I said. When my 2 minutes ended, the board president just said thank you and called the next speaker. By the next morning, that phone video was everywhere on local Facebook groups with hundreds of comments arguing about whether Ms. Grant should go to jail. 2 days after that, a courier showed up at our door with an envelope that required a signature. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Miss Grant's lawyer demanding I stop spreading lies about his client or face a defamation lawsuit. The letter listed specific quotes from my board meeting speech and called them false and malicious statements intended to damage Ms. Grant's reputation. Pooja had warned me this might happen, so I scanned it and emailed it to her right away. She called me back within an hour and said she'd already sent a response letter to Miss Grant's lawyer. She explained that truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and we had dozens of witnesses plus the fire marshal's investigation to back up everything I said. She also mentioned our pending federal lawsuit and suggested they worry about their own legal problems. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Just laid in bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying everything over and over. The next few days got worse with nightmares every time I closed my eyes, and this constant feeling like I couldn't breathe. I stopped eating because food made me want to throw up, and I couldn't focus on homework or anything else. My mom found me crying in the bathroom at 3 in the morning, and that's when she called the counseling center. The therapist they assigned me was this older woman who had me start by just naming 5 things I could see in her office. We made a list of small goals like eating 1 full meal a day and taking a shower every morning, really basic stuff that felt impossible, but she said we'd work up from there. She taught me this breathing technique where you count to 4 breathing in, hold for 4, then out for 4, and gave me a worksheet to track when I did it. Right when I was starting to feel slightly less crazy, Pooja called with news about the fire marshal's report. The official investigation found that faulty wiring in the West Wing caused the actual fire, not a drill or false alarm like some people were saying. The report specifically noted that the chemistry classroom door was found locked from the inside, and that evacuation was delayed by approximately 4 minutes. Why did Ms. Grant pick chemistry class for this plan? I'm trying to understand how she knew there'd be a real fire that exact day. Was it just terrible timing, or did she somehow know about the bad wiring? This proved Miss Grant knew there was a real emergency and chose to trap us anyway. Pooja said this would make the criminal charges way more serious. A week later, a box arrived at Pooja's office with our first batch of public records from the district. She called me to come look through them, but warned me most of it was useless. Page after page had these thick black lines covering whole paragraphs, making it impossible to read anything important. We could see Miss Grant's training certificates and some maintenance logs for the building, but all the emails and incident reports were basically destroyed with redactions. Pooja said this was typical, but we'd keep pushing for the full documents. Then Bryce called me with something huge. Someone had leaked him an email Ms. Grant sent to the principal 3 months before the fire. In it, she complained about having to follow IEPs and called disability accommodations, enabling weakness in students who need tough love instead. She specifically mentioned wheelchair users as an example of students who were probably faking for attention. Bryce read it to me over the phone, and I felt sick, but also relieved because this proved everything. Pooja immediately requested a copy for our case file and started outlining a new legal strategy. Instead of just focusing on that one day, she wanted to show a pattern of discrimination that the district ignored. 3 days later, I was heading to my car after school when I heard someone calling my name. Caitlin was standing by the bike racks, looking around like she was scared someone would see her talking to me. She walked over fast and kept her voice low, saying she needed to tell me something important about Miss Grant. We sat in my car and she started crying, explaining how Ms. Grant had been pulling her aside for weeks before the fire, asking questions about my disability and whether I'd ever stood up or walked when I thought nobody was watching. Caitlin said Miss Grant kept telling her that kids these days fake disabilities for special treatment, and that someone needed to expose the truth. She showed me text messages on her phone where Miss Grant had sent her articles about people pretending to need wheelchairs and asked her to watch me closely in class. Caitlin wrote everything down in a statement right there in my car, signing it and letting me take photos of the texts. The next morning, Bryce's second article went live on the news website, and my phone started blowing up with notifications. He'd included the leaked email about Miss Grant calling disability accommodations enabling weakness, and had quotes from 6 students who agreed to talk without using their names. The article laid out a timeline showing how Miss Grant had been questioning my disability for months, and included Caitlin's statement about being coached to doubt me. Within hours, the article had thousands of shares, and the comment section exploded with people finally understanding this wasn't just one bad decision, but a planned attack on disabled students. That afternoon, Pooja forwarded me a link with a warning to brace myself. Miss Grant had gone on some podcast called Truth Warriors, where she spent 40 minutes claiming we were all crisis actors who had rehearsed the whole fire incident to get her fired. She said the fire department was in on it, that Mikey's death was fake, and that I could walk perfectly fine but was part of some conspiracy to destroy traditional education. We downloaded the entire episode, and Pooja had her assistant transcribe every word. Knowing Miss Grant was just digging herself deeper with each crazy claim she made. The threatening messages started that night. First, just a few angry DMs calling me a liar and saying I deserved what happened. By morning, I had dozens of messages from accounts with no profile pictures. Some saying they knew where I lived, others describing what they wanted to do to me for destroying an innocent teacher. One message had a photo of my house taken from the street. My mom called the police and they said to document everything, but there wasn't much they could do about anonymous online threats. I started taking different routes to the school, parking in different spots and never going anywhere alone. My phone rang during lunch the next day, and it was Lee Snyder from the fire marshal's office asking if I could come in for another interview. At his office, he had a thick folder of papers and started asking super specific questions about the exact second the fire alarm went off, how long it took Mrs. Grant to reach the door, and whether the deadbolt made a clicking sound when she turned it. He wanted to know if anyone had tried to open the door from the outside, if Ms. Grant had looked out the window at other classes evacuating, and exactly what position Mikey was in when he collapsed. His questions were so detailed that I realized he was building something bigger than just a report. He asked me to draw a diagram of where everyone was standing and mark the exact path I took when I dragged myself across the floor. 2 days later, during third period, hundreds of students just got up and walked out of class. Someone had organized a walkout to protest how the school was handling everything, and kids were streaming into the hallways heading for the main exit. The accessible ramp I usually used got completely jammed with students, and nobody could move for almost 10 minutes, proving exactly what we'd been saying about emergency evacuation problems. Teachers were yelling for everyone to return to class, but nobody listened. Principal Glover got on the intercom threatening suspensions, but students kept walking out to the parking lot where someone had set up a microphone and speakers. Kids took turns talking about their own experiences with Miss Grant and other teachers who didn't believe in disabilities. That weekend, I finally worked up the courage to visit Mikey's parents. Their house was small and quiet, and his mom's eyes were red and puffy when she opened the door. We sat in their living room under a wall of Mikey's photos, and I told them how sorry I was, how he tried to help during the fire, how brave he was. His dad said they didn't want apologies or sympathy. They wanted real accountability and changes, so no other family would go through this. His mom mentioned they were thinking about starting a scholarship fund in Mikey's name for students with disabilities who wanted to study medicine or emergency response. We talked for 2 hours about what Mikey would have wanted and how to make sure his death meant something. Monday morning, Pooja called me excited because she'd just gotten an email from a teacher at the school. The woman taught math across the hall from the chemistry room and said she'd tried to check on our class when the alarm went off. She'd grabbed the door handle and found it locked, then knocked hard, but nobody answered. She could hear kids screaming inside and tried her master key, but the deadbolt was engaged from inside. This was huge because it proved someone outside our class had tried to help and found the door locked, destroying any claim that we were lying about being trapped. The teacher agreed to give a sworn statement and testify if needed. Pooja started preparing me for giving a deposition, which meant lawyers from Ms. Grant's side would ask me questions under oath, while a court reporter typed everything. We met at her office every day after school, and she'd pretend to be the defense attorney, asking me hostile questions and trying to confuse me or make me angry. She taught me to pause before answering, to say, "I don't recall," if I wasn't sure, and to never guess about anything. We practiced the story over and over until I could tell it without crying or getting flustered, keeping my voice steady even when she asked really mean questions about my disability. By the end of the week, I was exhausted but felt ready for whatever they threw at me. Then Friday afternoon, the rumors started spreading through group texts and social media. People were saying the school board was meeting in secret to discuss Ms. Grant's case, and that some board members thought there wasn't enough proof she meant to hurt anyone. Someone's mom who worked at the district office said they were considering letting her come back with just a warning and some extra training. Our group chat exploded with everyone arguing about what to do. Some kids wanted to stage another protest or go to the media with more stories. Others thought we should trust the legal process and not do anything that might hurt our case. Terry said we should threaten to release more evidence unless they kept her banned. PJ wanted to organize parents to flood the next board meeting. Nobody could agree on anything, and people started taking sides, with some calling others cowards for wanting to wait, and others saying we'd ruin everything by acting too aggressive. I sat there watching everyone argue until Pooja texted me to come to her office right away. She had 8 sworn statements from my classmates spread across her desk and was typing fast on her computer. She told me the board was meeting tomorrow to vote on letting Ms. Grant come back, and we needed to file an emergency motion tonight. I watched her fingers fly across the keyboard as she wrote about how Ms. Grant was a danger to students. She attached all the statements plus medical records showing what happened to kids who got smoke damage. The court clerk's office stayed open late for emergency filings, and we drove there in the rain. Pooja handed over the thick stack of papers, and the clerk stamped them with the time. We got copies, and Pooja said now the judge had to review it before the board could vote. The next morning, my phone rang early, and it was someone from the district office. They wanted to meet with me and my parents privately about a possible resolution. My mom drove me to the district building where 3 people in suits were waiting in a conference room. Mrs. Grant's email calling wheelchair users fake is making me wonder how someone becomes so sure about things they can't possibly know. How does a person look at a student in a wheelchair and decide they're pretending? They pushed papers across the table offering us money for my medical bills and therapy costs. The catch was this thick NDA that said I could never talk about what happened again. Not to reporters, not online, not even to friends who weren't there. The money was more than we'd ever seen, and my mom's eyes got wide looking at the number. I asked if I could think about it, and they said I had 48 hours to decide. That afternoon, our support group met at Terry's house, and everyone was upset about different things. Some kids had gotten settlement offers too and didn't know what to do. PJ said taking the money meant letting them buy our silence about Mikey. Another girl said her family needed the money for her brother's asthma treatments after the fire. We went around the room and everyone shared what they were thinking. Terry said we should all do what we needed to do for our families. Nobody would judge anyone for taking a settlement if they needed it. But we agreed that those who could keep fighting would keep pushing for real changes. The next day, Rick Joyner went on local radio and said anyone still talking about Ms. Grant would face defamation lawsuits. He said we were lying about what happened and destroying an innocent woman's career. My hands shook listening to him twist everything we went through. Pooja called me right after and said not to worry because truth was our best defense. She helped me write out exactly what I could and couldn't say publicly. Stick to facts, avoid opinions, never exaggerate even small details. Meanwhile, Bryce had been digging through old public records at the state education department. He found documents from 3 years ago showing Missy Grant got written up at another district. She'd refused to follow IEP accommodations for students with learning disabilities. Parents had complained that she called their kids lazy and refused to give them extra time on tests. The district had put a formal reprimand in her file before she left for our school. This pattern made our case so much stronger because it showed she'd always thought disabilities were fake. Bryce published the documents online and suddenly more people started believing us. Then Lee Snyder called to say his investigation was complete, and he wanted to go over his findings with me. I met him at the fire station where he had diagrams and photos spread across a table. He showed me how the door mechanism worked and pointed to burn patterns in the hallway. His report said the locked door blocked our emergency exit and directly contributed to injuries. He used the word criminal when describing what Ms. Grant did. He was sending everything to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for prosecution. That same week, Caitlin texted asking if she could come over. She brought the affidavit Pooja had prepared about Miss Grant coaching her to question my disability. Her hands trembled as she signed it in front of my mom, who could act as a witness. She asked if her name could stay private where possible since people were already calling her a snitch. I told her I understood and appreciated her courage in telling the truth. Friday morning, the news broke that the DA was filing formal charges against Ms. Grant. The charges were reckless endangerment of children and criminal neglect. She had to turn herself in by noon or they'd issue an arrest warrant. Photographers were waiting outside the courthouse when she showed up with her lawyer. The image of her in handcuffs made the front page of the newspaper. My phone blew up with texts from classmates who couldn't believe it was really happening. Some people said she deserved worse, but at least it was something. The district immediately put out a statement trying to distance themselves from everything. They blamed the substitute teacher service they used and said Miss Grant wasn't really their employee. But I wasn't letting them get away with that. They hired the service, they put her in our classroom, they ignored complaints about her. At the next board meeting, I stood up during public comment and listed every failure. How they didn't check her background, didn't supervise her, didn't listen when kids complained. The board members looked uncomfortable but didn't respond. That weekend was the candlelight vigil for Mikey at the town park. Hundreds of people showed up holding candles in paper cups. His parents spoke about their son and what he wanted to be when he grew up. Standing there watching the candles flicker in the dark, I felt something shift inside me. My anger at Miss Grant was still there, but it had changed into something bigger. I didn't just want her punished anymore. I wanted new emergency protocols, better training for substitutes, real evacuation plans for disabled students. I wanted the whole system that let this happen to change, so no other family would lose their kid like this. The next Monday, Pooja met me at her office with a stack of papers thick as a phone book and started going through every single form we needed to file the federal civil rights lawsuit against the district. She pushed the papers across her desk and showed me where to sign while explaining this could take years to get through the courts, but we had to start somewhere if we wanted real change. My hand was shaking as I signed my name on page after page because this made everything official, and there was no going back now. 2 weeks later, we got the notice about Miss Grant's preliminary hearing at the courthouse downtown, and I made sure to get there early to watch from the back row. Her lawyer stood up and tried to get the whole thing thrown out, saying there wasn't enough evidence of criminal intent, but the judge wasn't buying it. The judge looked at all the witness statements and the fire marshal's report and said there was more than enough to move forward with a full criminal trial. Miss Grant's face went pale when the judge said that, and she grabbed her lawyer's arm, so hard you could see her knuckles turn white. Outside the courthouse, it was total chaos with protesters on both sides holding signs and screaming at each other and at anyone who walked past. Some people had signs saying, Miss Grant was a hero standing up to fake disabilities, while others had pictures of Mikey and signs about justice. The noise was so loud it made my head pound, and I had to focus on the breathing exercises my therapist taught me just to get through the crowd to the parking lot. My mom practically shoved me in the car, and we drove away fast while people banged on the windows. 3 months passed before the district finally agreed to settlement talks, and Pooja warned me not to get my hopes up because first offers were always terrible. We sat in this conference room for 6 hours while lawyers argued back and forth about what the district would and wouldn't do. They offered to do ADA compliance checks and evacuation training, which sounded good, but then they wanted us to sign this NDA that would basically mean I could never talk about what happened ever again. Pooja told them no way on the full NDA, but maybe we could work out something limited that just covered the settlement amount, not the actual events. Meanwhile, the State Board of Education opened their own investigation into Miss Grant's teaching license, which meant even if she somehow avoided jail, she might never be allowed in a classroom again. The investigators called me in to give another statement, and I had to go through the whole story again while they took notes and asked really specific questions about what she said and did. They seemed especially interested in the part where she'd talked to me weeks before about her nephew and how that showed she'd been planning this. I started going to physical therapy twice a week because all the stress had made me tense up so bad that my shoulders and arms were constantly hurting. The physical therapist was this older woman who also used a wheelchair, and she understood exactly what I was dealing with both physically and mentally. During our sessions, I met other disabled people who'd been through their own fights with schools or employers, and hearing their stories made me feel less alone. One woman told me about suing her college for accessibility violations and winning after 3 years of fighting, which gave me hope our case could work too. Bryce published this huge investigation that connected what happened to us with similar incidents at schools across the country where disabled kids got hurt because of bad policies. His article had all these statistics and expert quotes, but also told our story in a way that felt respectful and real without making it seem like entertainment. The piece went viral online, and suddenly reporters from bigger outlets started calling wanting to follow up. But I stuck with Bryce because he'd been fair from the start. A few weeks later, I noticed construction crews at the school installing new emergency equipment and putting up signs showing accessible evacuation routes. They added these special evacuation chairs on every floor and trained staff on how to use them, which should have happened years ago, but at least it was happening now. The principal made this big announcement about their commitment to safety, but never mentioned Mikey or admitted they'd done anything wrong before. Then we got word that Miss Grant was taking a plea deal to avoid the risk of serious jail time if the case went to full trial. The deal meant she'd plead guilty to a lesser charge of reckless endangerment and give up her teaching license forever, but wouldn't serve any prison time, just probation and community service. Part of me wanted her to rot in jail, but Pooja reminded me that her never being able to teach again was actually a pretty big win, considering how these cases usually go. Our civil lawsuit finally settled after almost a year of back-and-forth negotiations and depositions and legal paperwork that made my head spin. The settlement covered all our medical bills and therapy costs plus money for future treatment, and they agreed to all the policy changes we'd been pushing for. The way they structured that settlement offer with the NDA makes me wonder if this is how schools always handle these situations. Do they usually try to buy silence along with covering costs? The only catch was we couldn't say the exact dollar amount, but I could still talk about everything else that happened, which felt like a fair compromise since the story itself was what mattered most. The school split into 2 camps after everything came out, with some parents posting on Facebook about how Ms. Grant was just trying to teach kids not to be weak, while others called for criminal charges. I started getting messages from random people I didn't even know, some saying I was brave and others calling me a liar who got a teacher fired for doing her job. My mom wanted me to respond to every single attack, but I decided to just block anyone who wasn't being decent and focus on my own recovery instead of fighting with strangers online. The sentencing hearing was set for 3 months later, and Pooja helped me write my victim impact statement, making me practice reading it out loud until I could get through it without my voice shaking too much. When the day came, I wheeled myself up to the podium in the courtroom and told the judge about the nightmares, the panic attacks every time I smelled smoke, and how I still couldn't go near the chemistry wing without my chest getting tight. Dr. Hayashi took the stand after me and explained in detail how the smoke damaged everyone's lungs, showing x-rays and test results that proved we'd all have breathing problems for years. Mrs. Grant sat there in her nice suit looking smaller than I remembered, and when the judge gave her 18 months probation and 300 hours of community service, she just nodded and didn't look at anyone. The fire alarms at the school kept setting me off for months, making me freeze up and shake even though I knew they were just drills. But my therapist taught me this breathing thing where I count to 4 and remind myself I'm safe now. Each time got a little easier, from full panic attacks that lasted 20 minutes down to just a few minutes of shaking, and by spring I could usually calm myself down before anyone even noticed. We held the first fundraiser for the Mikey Memorial Scholarship at the community center, raising almost $10,000 in one night from local businesses and families who wanted something good to come from all this. His parents stood up at the end to thank everyone, and his mom just said they hoped the scholarship would help kids like Mikey, who had big dreams despite their challenges. No crying or big speeches, just quiet hope. 8 months after the fire, they finally reopened the chemistry wing with new safety equipment and evacuation chairs on every floor, and Terry asked if I wanted to go see the new room with him. We went after school when it was empty, and I made it through the doorway, stayed for exactly 5 minutes looking at the new desks and emergency exits before I had to leave. But Terry said that was huge progress. Someone told me Miss Grant moved to Arkansas or maybe Alabama to live with her sister, and the Facebook arguments about whether she was a monster or a victim kept going without me, because I stopped checking what people said months ago. I spent a whole weekend writing up everything that happened for this disability rights website, just laying out the facts without trying to convince anyone of anything, just hoping it might help someone else stuck in a bad situation. The comment section filled up with other people sharing their own stories about teachers or bosses who didn't believe them, and even though some trolls showed up, most people were supportive and shared resources that actually helped. The local disability advocacy group invited me to join their monthly meetings at the library, where we worked on getting the county to update all their emergency plans to include people with different needs. We spent hours going through evacuation procedures for every public building, marking problems and suggesting fixes. Boring work that felt important because it could save someone's life someday. The meetings were mostly older people who'd been fighting these fights for decades, and they taught me how to write letters to officials, which forms to file, and how to keep pushing when everyone wanted you to just go away. Justice didn't come in some big dramatic moment, but in small changes, new policies, training sessions for teachers, and evacuation drills that actually included everyone. Not complete, but real. Thanks for letting me wonder about all these things with you today. It's been really interesting exploring together. Hope to see you again soon. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.